I made a comment a while back while recording the video and audio entry for the Batman vs. Superman review that I was doing that DC was having a really hard time fielding a good movie into theaters to cover their most popular IP. And upon reflection at breakfast this morning, I kind of feel like maybe Marvel is having some of that problem too. In spite of the rabid success that the movies that take place in the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, are currently having, I think you would be within reason if you said that the X-Men were probably Marvel's biggest and most well-known franchise at this point. And yet, they have not definitively fielded, or I guess I should say rather that they have had trouble definitively fielding movies that everybody seemed to really enjoy. The first three X-Men movies with Patrick Stewart and his goons met with mixed results. All of them did. The third one being a turkey that most people really weren't very fond of. For what it's worth, I kind of enjoyed the third one, but that shows you what kind of taste in movies I have. Now all of a sudden we've got James McAvoy and his goons who are trying to retell some of the same stories over again, and the question rises whether or not they're doing any good. And for the most part, they seem to be following the same patterns that Stewart and his guys did. First Class was an outstanding movie. Days of Future Past was an acceptable follow-up, but now you got to wonder about whether or not X-Men Apocalypse is the turkey that Last Stand was for so many different people. Add to that the fact that Days of Future Past and Apocalypse are both treading on some of the most well-loved stories in the X-Men franchise that you really have to wonder whether or not it's possible for somebody to do them any kind of justice whatsoever. And that is the question: was justice done? Overall, yes, this was a much better third movie than The Last Stand. So, I'm going to do that kind of funny thing that I do sometimes when I make these things, and I'm going to start out by saying that yes, this was an enjoyable movie. My wife and I went to go see it together, and we both enjoyed it. We both laughed, and seemed to have a pretty good time. The after credits stinger was also not without its share of enjoyability, which we'll cover that in a little bit in the spoiler section. And there is going to be a spoiler section, unfortunately. That's going to probably make up the vast majority of this video. Yeah, very enjoyable, really, when it comes right down to it. Not everything was perfect in terms of the Apocalypse storyline that we all remember from the 80s cartoons, which were just so very good. And of course the comic books. You're gonna have deviations, and yes, Apocalypse does kind of look like a prune most of the time on screen. They tried so hard, and it just looked like a damn prune. It's this grimace on a bad day. It really is. That having been said, Oscar Isaac, who has been in freaking everything lately, a lot of people gave him guff in the media for giving a very wooden, unnuanced performance, and that you couldn't really see the brilliance of Oscar Isaac from beneath the 3 feet of caked makeup that this man had to wear across every inch of his body. And I'll go ahead and say that I don't think the makeup helped at all. But I didn't really have a problem with much of the performance that he gave as the archetypal, silken-voiced big bad villain with delusions of grandeur. I didn't really have a huge problem with that. He wasn't any better or worse than I expected him to be. All the cast that you remember from the previous James McAvoy movies are back, and they're all pretty much still in fine spirits. They found a great bunch of people to reboot that franchise with, and of course the series continues to lean heavily on James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender as Professor Xavier and Eric Lenscher, respectively, and they're just watching them on screen is just absolutely a delight. Fassbender in particular is just so stinking good at what he does. Don't want to ruin that plot of the that particular point of the story, but the fate that befalls Lenscher in the first act of the movie is just, you know, it's coming, and it's still awful. People still gasped in the theater when it landed, and it did its job. It did its job, and Lenscher, Fassbender is just there's just bucket loads of talent that man is just carrying around with him and not using for these movies. I won't say that he's wasted, because he's just so good. But holy moly. James McAvoy also good. Nicholas Hoult as Hank McCoy is wonderful. Jennifer Lawrence, of course, is Mystique. For whatever reason, I always preferred Rebecca Romijn in that role. Raven Darkholm, I think that was her last name, was Darkholm. Anyway, there's Rebecca Romijn will always portray that character as slightly more exotic, and less of a just a grumpy late teens, early 20s woman. Not to throw shade, I guess is the term that the young people use now. Not to discredit Jennifer Lawrence's performance. Did a great job. Fun seeing her, fun watching her character arc over the last 3 movies, watching her evolve. New players in the game. Watching the new Scott Summers, the Cyclops, was always fun. Didn't do a bad job. Good, a better image for Cyclops than the Psych they got for the original movies. I'm sorry to say. James Marsden, I believe, was who they got for the original movies. And I like this new iteration of him better. Lots of time with I don't remember what that guy's real name is. the young man they got to play Cyclops. Lots of time with his brother Havoc in the movie. That was fun too. Yeah, just overall really good. I kind of thought that Archangel was a little bit of a throwaway and just an eye candy piece. They were from the outset trying to make him seem like a much bigger, badder man than he originally was, but he was just useless. Not entirely unimpressed with Olivia Munn's turn as Psylocke. Credit where it's due, she actually put the costume on and didn't look horrible in it, and didn't manage to look like a complete and total toon every time she was on screen. It was neat seeing the psychic blade in several different set pieces there. All in all, not a bad movie. You know, you really have to give credit where it's due here. They have done a decent job of ramping up the spectacle in these last 3 X-Men movies, and I was wondering how they were going to make the 3rd one impressive, and they didn't disappoint. So yeah, you know, on the whole, not a horrible movie, not without its foibles, and that's where we get into the spoilery part of the movie. Some of this less spoilery and some of it more spoilery. But you're hopefully all adults if you're watching this, so I'm not going to throw up banners or anything. But yeah, we're going to start talking about spoiler shit next. The movie is good, but it's good for the wrong reasons in a lot of places. One of the big things that they cashed in on in Days of Future Past is a wonderful, delightful, best scene in the whole stinking movie, Days of Future Past. Everybody already knows what I'm talking about here. Of course, the slow-mo sequence with Quicksilver. Much, much better Quicksilver than the one that the MCU decided that they were going to cast as the brother of Wanda Maximoff. Much, much better Quicksilver in the X-Men movies. Much more attitude, better use of his slow motion. And everybody loved that movie. Everybody loved that particular sequence in Days of Future Past so much that they just did another one of those. and there's making of featurettes for it online, and I won't go into too much detail on it because it is, of course, it's so stinking enjoyable to watch it because it's so beautifully done, and the guy that they got to play Quicksilver is just an absolute riot, and it's very well done. It's very well directed. It also, unfortunately, has been done before. There's a gag in Ocean's 13 where somebody suggests just cutting the power on the casino. Somebody else stepped in. I think Rusty steps in and goes, "No, we can't do that. That was the gag that we did with the last job. You can't do the gag that you did with the last job on this job. You got to think of a new thing to do." And I kind of feel that way here. You got to think of a new thing to do. So on one hand, I'm a little disappointed that they tapped the Quicksilver card again. On the other hand, I just don't care because that is probably the best part of X-Men Apocalypse is that Quicksilver scene. Just an absolute riot. Gonna have to go back and watch this several times to pick up all the cute little stuff that he did. One super spoilery thing in particular, if you're watching this review now and you haven't been to see the movie yet, pay attention to the very first thing that happens once that sequence starts, because it will matter. My wife and I both kind of scratched our heads when it was all said and done, going, "Wait a minute. Did he or didn't he?" So pay attention. I don't want to spoil it for you, but absolutely pay attention to the first part. The very first thing he does in that sequence. Ding! I'm popular. Yeah. The other thing that really kind of bothered me about this movie, maybe more than anything else did, is they lean on the Phoenix angle again with Jean Grey. Yes, I get the fact that Phoenix is all part and parcel to who Jean Grey is. But once you introduce and I feel like it's a MacGuffin here, once you introduce the MacGuffin that is the Phoenix entity into your universe, and you make it as controlled as it appears to be in this movie, that's it. Jean Grey is now your trump card. My wife and I had a discussion about the pros and cons of the Phoenix and what it was and wasn't vulnerable to, and in general nerded out next to a senior citizen in the theater who was looking at us the entire time like we were a bunch of little kids, and that's fine. But yeah, once you play the Phoenix card, I mean, it's an integral part of Jean Grey from the comics. I get that, but once you play the Phoenix card, that's a bell that it's really, really difficult to unring. I'm not sure entirely what direction they're going to go in these next couple of movies that they're going to have. But yeah, that's a bell that they're going to have to work awful hard to unring now that they've rung it. Especially the manner in which they ring it in this movie. Holy... Yeah, not a bad set piece when that particular bell gets rung. Yeah, the Phoenix thing, the Quicksilver thing. I guess the other thing that it was fun to see him, but I think he needs to be done, is they tap Wolverine again, and they do it in a very cool way that anybody who's familiar with the Wolverine arc or the cartoons or any of his comics, it's a very, oh yeah, I know exactly why they did that kind of a thing. So I can respect why they did it. I can definitely respect how they did it. It's great to see Jackman back on the screen doing awful, awful things with those claws that are coming out of his hands. That also is not just a good set piece. Lots of Hugh Jackman going nuts. I think it might just be time for dear old Hugh to hang up the claws. As much as I would love to see my rated R Wolverine movie, as much as I would so love to see my rated R Wolverine movie, I think it might be time for Hugh to hang up the claws. Yeah. There are rumors that the next X-Men movie is going to have number 23, which is basically the female equivalent of Wolverine in it. The stinger at the end of the movie kind of alludes to that as well. Won't spoil that. Very fun. Kind of a rare a rarer thing like the popping up of Thanos in the MCU. But again, if you watched any of the cartoons in the 80s, shouldn't be that big of a shock to you. Overall, not a bad movie. Definitely did have my gripes, but I guess one more thing is Apocalypse is so frapping unpredictable as far as his power usage goes. And you'll have to keep a sharp eye out for this because I absolutely missed it in the theater. Pretty early on, he demonstrates his power by, like, unmaking 3 guys in an alley right in front of Storm, right in front of your eye. Well, my wife, eagle-eyed as she now is, informed me that he didn't so much unmake them as he did pull sand out of a wall and cut their heads off with a stream of sand. So definitely pay attention when Apocalypse is doing stuff on the screen. He just, so many different powers and this and that and the other that you kind of wonder at the end of the movie why he doesn't do things differently when the final showdown happens. It's just like, wait a minute, you can just sort of dismiss people from this mortal coil anytime you want by just, waving your hand and well, they're all dead. Why the hell didn't you do that? The other thing that's a little weird is they go on about how Apocalypse continues to prolong his life is this gizmo that he's got that you've probably seen in the trailers that transfers his consciousness, not unlike a Goa'uld, from one person to the next, without the use of a little symbiont. But somehow, in spite of the fact that the machine is just transferring his consciousness into a new host whenever he gets old. There's the yawn. Sorry about that. Somehow, in spite of all that, he's picking up powers from his old host as well, which is one of the big things. Is in the thousands and thousands of years that this guy has been alive, he's never run across a mutant who was capable of doing mind control the way that Charles Xavier was, which is why he's got such a hard-on for Professor X. Well, the light just suddenly got a whole lot brighter. And it's like, wait a minute, if you're just transferring your consciousness, how are you getting genetic material to it? But now you're just kind of picking nits. At any event, spoilery section done. Not an unenjoyable movie. Not nearly as bad as everything online is making it out to be. I really kind of feel like folks are taking it to this movie with a cast iron skillet about how unwieldy it is. I definitely would have done some things differently. I'm disappointed that they fell back on a couple of old tropes in order to make the movie as enjoyable as it is. But overall, not a bad third movie. Definitely a far more solid trilogy than the original X-Men. Definitely a far more solid trilogy. Go out and give it a watch.